life of Saint Pulcheria, the Empress. When the Greek Emperor Arcadius died, he left behind a young son, Theodosius, who was 8 years old, and 3 daughters, Pulcheria, Arcadia, and Marina. Pulcheria, who was older than her brother, was most wise and chaste. By God's providence, she was granted a great gift, to help the young Greek Emperor Theodosius in the defense of Orthodoxy, which was being assailed at that time by heretics. She possessed wisdom beyond her years, and was made co-ruler by her brother, receiving the title of Augusta. She was 16 years of age when she received imperial authority and began to rule the Greek Empire, not in any womanish fashion, but manfully. The wisdom and prudence given her by God, because of the purity of her life, astonished the whole world. Out of love for God and concern for the tranquility of her subjects, she did not wish to take a husband, so that no discord should arise between her spouse and her brother. Rather, she betrothed herself to God and resolved to abide in virginity until death. As a token of the dedication of her virginity to God, she erected a wondrous and costly holy table in the cathedral of the capital. She also exhorted her sisters, Arcadia and Marina, to preserve their virginity, and they likewise determined to maintain their purity until death. Living with her in fasting and prayer, they obeyed Pulcheria, not only as their elder sister and as their empress, but as though she were their mother. She also acted as a mother for her brother, the Emperor Theodosius, and was most solicitous of him, teaching him the fear of God. She was fluent in the Greek and Latin languages and served as his teacher, instructing him not only in the arts and sciences, but in good morals as well. She taught him how to behave discreetly, how to conduct himself in council and when in procession, when to punish lawbreakers and when to show them mercy. In short, she instructed him in every good deed, befitting one who wishes to rule well. And the good seed did not fall on barren ground, for Theodosius heeded her in everything. And thus, when he reached manhood, because of her beneficial instruction, he was kind and meek, patient and guileless, wise and prudent, compassionate and merciful beyond all other emperors. Moreover, Saint Pulcheria's prayers furthered the good results obtained in his life through her instruction. The saint built a glorious church dedicated to the most holy and pure Theotokos, and she founded many other churches and monasteries. She did not fail to give alms to the poor, and it was through her efforts that the Greek Empire remained at peace. Her reign was a period of tranquility, save only for the divisions brought about by heretics. When the Emperor Theodosius reached the age of 20, and the time had come for him to be wed, the blessed Pulcheria took care that a maiden worthy of the imperial bridal chamber was found. At that time a young woman named Athenius came from Athens to Constantinople. Although a pagan by faith, and the daughter of a renowned Athenian philosopher named Leontius, Athenius was fair, chaste, and wise. Having thoroughly studied with her father philosophy and astronomy, geometry, and all the disciplines of the Hellenes, she surpassed even the most learned in knowledge. The reason she came to Constantinople was this. When her father was dying, he divided his estate between his 2 sons, Valerian and Attius, but left nothing to her except a few gold coins. When asked by his kinsmen and neighbors what he was leaving to his daughter, he answered, "Her beauty and her wisdom will suffice for her." And having said this, he died. And so all the father's possessions were divided between the 2 brothers, but the sister received nothing. She therefore went to the imperial city to lodge a complaint against her brothers. When Pulcheria saw her and beheld her beauty, virtue, and wisdom, she resolved to wed her to her brother. Therefore, Pulcheria first had her baptized, and then took care of her as though she were her own daughter, and as one now worthy to marry the Emperor Theodosius. She was given the name of Dokia in baptism, and later she gave birth to Eudoxia, Theodosius's daughter, who, when she had come of age, was married to Valentinian III of Old Rome, whom Theodosius had made co-emperor. It was through the efforts of the blessed Pulcheria that the Third Ecumenical Council was convened in Ephesus against the impious Nestorius. When her brother, seduced by heresy, began to stray from the path of truth, with great zeal for piety, Pulcheria admonished him and confirmed him in orthodoxy, for which many holy fathers praised her. However, after a few years, her brother could no longer bear to see St. Pulcheria warring against the heresy he had once embraced, and so he prepared to remove her from the imperial throne and authority. So it happened for a time, for God allows those who are pleasing to him to be tried. And this is what occurred. There was a certain eunuch, Chrysanthus by name, whom the Emperor Theodosius loved and retained as one of his most influential counselors. This Chrysanthus was full of wickedness, malice, spite, and the love of money. He rose up against the most holy Patriarch Flavian, who had ascended the patriarchal throne after St. Proclus. Flavian was a man worthy of the rank of patriarch, for he lived a pious and heavenly life. But Chrysanthus, being a heretic, did not assent to his elevation. Intending to make an accusation against the patriarch, he sent word to Flavian, saying that he should present a gift to the emperor, a blessing, as it were, from the newly enthroned hierarch. Flavian had loaves made of the purest flour, and sent them to the palace. But Chrysanthus, receiving them there on behalf of the emperor, rejected them, saying, "The patriarch should send gold, not bread, to the emperor as a blessing." The patriarch replied by means of his messengers, "Chrysanthus knows well that the church's gold and silver belong to God, and are to be given to no one, except the poor." This answer enraged Chrysanthus even more against the patriarch, and he considered by what means he might bring about his downfall. Perceiving that the pious and blessed Pulcheria strongly supported the patriarch, and that for this reason it was not possible to do him harm, that serpent resolved to harm her instead, and he began to sow discord between Pulcheria and the Empress of Dokia, undermining their love for one another, and stirring up animosity between them by various intrigues. It was the habit of Emperor Theodosius to sign his imperial ordinances without reading them or inquiring as to what they contained. Therefore, whoever prepared the decrees could do so in whatever manner he saw fit, and bring them to the emperor, who, without reading what was written in them, would without further ado affix his imperial seal. The blessed Pulcheria, who was always concerned for Theodosius, seeing his negligence in this matter, wished to correct him in a loving manner, and devised the following plan. She wrote a decree in the name of the emperor, according to which the emperor, at the entreaty of his sister Pulcheria, agreed to grant his wife as a slave, and stated that henceforth he no longer would possess any power over her. After preparing this decree, she gave it to the emperor to be signed. As was his custom, he affixed his imperial seal to it, neither reading the order nor asking what it contained. Pulcheria, taking the document, respectfully summoned the Empress of Dokia into her chambers, and on a pretext kept her there for a long time, affectionately and respectfully conversing with her. When the emperor sent word requesting the empress to come to him, Pulcheria would not let her go. When the emperor sent for her a second time, Pulcheria, laughing, replied, "Tell the emperor he has no authority over his empress, for he has delivered her to me in bondage, and has confirmed the same by his imperial decree." And after saying this, she herself went to her brother and said, "Behold, your majesty, what results when you sign decrees without reading them?" And she showed him the decree. And by this wise device she taught the emperor to be more careful, and to examine and read the documents which were necessary for him to sign. When the wicked eunuch Chrysanthus learned of this, he went to the Empress of Dokia and said, "See what Pulcheria dares to do to you, how she humiliates you, making you one of her servants. How long will you suffer such indignities at her hands? Are you too not an empress, and the closest of all to the emperor, being of one flesh with him?" And thus did the evil Chrysanthus arouse the anger of Evdokia. Evdokia then began to incite her husband to strip Pulcheria of her imperial authority and to govern alone. Although the emperor, aroused by his wife and Chrysanthus, wished to comply, he was nevertheless ashamed to bring dishonor upon his sister, who was his mentor and further his senior. Evdokia and Chrysanthus therefore began secretly to entreat the patriarch to persuade Pulcheria to become a deaconess, hoping that this ruse would compel St. Pulcheria to relinquish her imperial authority. She already lived in a chaste and holy manner, and was worthy of that office. At that time it was the custom to constrain virgins and widows who lived chastely to accept the rank of deaconess, even against their will. When the patriarch secretly made this known to Pulcheria, she realized her brother's intention and the enmity felt towards her by the Empress and Chrysanthus. She therefore renounced her imperial authority herself, and left the palace with her servants for a quiet desert place where she could serve God in undisturbed quiet. Now the heretic Chrysanthus, seeing that the opportunity had arrived for him to carry out his wicked plans, incited the emperor against the patriarch, and so the Church of God, deprived of Pulcheria, the defender of piety, was greatly disturbed. The heretics were able to act without fear until God opened the eyes of the emperor's mind to know his error. He perceived that the empress's anger against St. Pulcheria was unjust, and to understand the hostile animosity of Chrysanthus against his sister. Once the Emperor Theodosius was brought a most beautiful and unusual apple. Amazed by its beauty and astonishing size, he sent it to his empress. She did not eat it, but sent it to the emperor's favorite, the senator Paulinus, who was at that time ill. Paulinus, in his turn, sent the apple to the emperor. When the emperor received the apple, he recognized it, and went to the empress, inquiring of her, "Where is the apple which I sent you?" The empress, not knowing that the apple had passed again into the emperor's hands, answered, "I have eaten it." Then the emperor, showing her the apple, demanded, "And what is this?" And from that time the empress fell from his favor, and he treated her with disdain, thinking that she was guilty of adultery with Paulinus. Paulinus was sent at once into exile in Cappadocia, and the emperor would not allow the empress into his presence. He also became very angry with the imperial counselor, the eunuch Chrysanthus, having learned how much evil he had caused, and he stripped him of his possessions and then sentenced him to exile. As the ship carrying Chrysanthus was sailing to its place of exile, it sank, and thus God himself exacted payment for the outrage Chrysanthus had perpetrated against the blameless St. Pulcheria. As for Paulinus, he was beheaded in exile on the emperor's orders, although he was innocent. The empress herself later confirmed by an oath as she was dying that he was not guilty of the sin imputed to him, and that she had not committed adultery. Nevertheless, God permitted Paulinus to suffer for the salvation of his soul, and allowed the empress to undergo misfortunes as a punishment. When the empress heard of Paulinus's beheading, she was deeply saddened that such a noble and chaste man should innocently suffer on her behalf, and she begged the emperor not to forbid her to go to Jerusalem to venerate the holy places. Her request was granted, and she departed to Jerusalem, where she distributed alms with great generosity, erected numerous churches, and founded many monasteries. She remained in Jerusalem a long time, until by means of numerous appeals she appeased the emperor's anger and reconciled herself to St. Pulcheria by sending her an image of the most pure Theotokos, painted by the holy evangelist Luke, as a token of peace and unshakable love. After Evdokia had gone to Jerusalem, the Emperor Theodosius requested his sister St. Pulcheria to return to her throne, but she refused, preferring to labor only for God in solitude, rather than to rule over many lands. The emperor again begged her to come to the palace and reign together with him, and he did not rest until he had persuaded her to do so. At length St. Pulcheria returned with great honor to her imperial palace. Again the storms of heresy ceased, and the waves were calmed, and the Greek Empire once more enjoyed peace. After a considerable time, the Empress of Dokia returned from Jerusalem, bringing with her the hand of the holy protomartyr Stephen. On the night when the relic had been brought as far as Chalcedon, St. Stephen appeared to the blessed Pulcheria, saying, "Now you have received what you desired, for I have come to Chalcedon." And in the morning Pulcheria arose, taking her brother, the Emperor Theodosius, and went to meet the hand of the holy protomartyr. Likewise they lovingly received the Empress of Dokia. When the Emperor Theodosius had reached the age of 42 and drew near to death, he told St. Pulcheria of a revelation he had received from God at Ephesus in the church of St. John the Theologian. While standing there at prayer, it was revealed to him that after his death a soldier, Marcion, would take up the scepter of the Greek Empire, and he begged Pulcheria to assist Marcion in his bid for the imperial throne. Marcion was born in Thrace, the son of a soldier and himself a courageous warrior, a mature man both in age and reason, inclined to virtue in every way, being merciful and kind towards all. From his youth he was destined for the throne, and was miraculously preserved from death. Once as he was going to Philippopolis, he found along the way the body of a man who had not long before been murdered. Standing there over the corpse, he was moved to pity for the murdered man, and wishing to accomplish a deed of mercy, he decided to bury him. As he began to dig the hole, travelers journeying along that same road to the city saw Marcion bearing the dead man, and they supposed that it was he who had committed the murder. Seizing him, they led him into the city and delivered him to judgment. As there was no one to testify as to his innocence, and since his testimony on his own behalf was not given credence, he was condemned to death as a murderer, and would have received the death sentence had God not disclosed the true murderer by a revelation. The real criminal received what his deeds merited, and Marcion was released with honor to serve in the Greek army under General Aspar. During the war with the Vandals, when the Vandals overcame the Greeks and many were led into captivity, Marcion was taken prisoner and was brought before Gaiseric, the prince of the Vandals. Once Gaiseric, wishing to review the captives at midday when the heat was great, went up to a place of vantage and saw Marcion sleeping on the ground. And as he looked upon Marcion, an eagle flew down over him, shading Marcion with his outstretched wings from the sun's rays. When Gaiseric saw this, he perceived what would come to pass, and he summoned the prisoner to question him concerning his name and place of birth, saying to him, "If you desire to live and to remain unharmed and to be freed, then swear to me that when you attain to the imperial dignity, you will never make war on the Vandals, but will remain at peace with us." And Marcion gave his word to the prince, and was released with honor to return to his home. When Marcion returned from captivity, he again rose to prominence in the Greek army. Once when the Greeks undertook a campaign against the Persians, Marcion fell ill along the way, and remained behind in the city of Lyssa in Sardinia. Two brothers, Tatian and Julian, honorable men, received him into their home. They remained at his side nursing him, and they came to love him greatly. After Marcion had recovered from his illness, both brethren went out hunting for birds. It was midday, and the heat of the sun compelled them to lie down and sleep. As they slept, Tatian awoke before the others, and he saw what Gaiseric had seen, a great eagle soaring above Marcion as he slept, overshadowing him and shielding him with his outstretched wings from the rays of the sun. Seeing this, Tatian awoke his younger brother Julian, and they were both astonished by the marvel. Then Marcion awoke from sleep, and the eagle flew away. Tatian and Julian predicted that Marcion would become emperor, and they asked Marcion, "What favor and kindness will you show us when you reign?" And he said to them, "If your prediction comes true, then you shall be like fathers to me." Marcion later became most eminent among the Greeks, for God glorifies the man whom he has chosen after his heart. When the pious Emperor Theodosius the Younger reposed, his Empress Evdokia departed again for Jerusalem, and after living there in a godly manner for a number of years, she too reposed, and was buried in the church of the holy protomartyr Stephen, which she had founded. After the death of her brother, the blessed Pulcheria, in accordance with the nobles and generals, elected Marcian to the throne as a man worthy of the imperial dignity and pleasing to God. When Marcian was enthroned, his first act was to summon the brothers Tatian and Julian, and honor them with high rank, making one to be ruler over Thrace and setting the other over Lycia. He likewise kept his oath to Gaiseric, the prince of the Vandals, and preserved peace with him. The Empress Pulcheria, having enthroned Marcian, wished to return again to her place of solitude, but the newly enthroned emperor and all the council of state begged her not to abandon them, for she was wise and experienced in all matters concerning the governance of the empire, and their desire, however, could only be effected if Pulcheria would agree to become the emperor's wife. She explained that inasmuch as she had consecrated her virginity to God, she intended to preserve it until death. The emperor also declared that he had vowed to God to preserve his virginity, and finally, for the sake of the Holy Church, which was troubled at that time by a multitude of heretics, Pulcheria was persuaded to wed the Emperor Marcian. Nevertheless, such was their marriage that the flower of their virginity in no way withered, but was preserved unharmed until the end of their lives, in accordance with the promise they had made to God. Chastity was natural to both of them, and their advanced age permitted them to preserve their virginity. Pulcheria was 51 years old at that time, and the emperor was also no longer young. Although Pulcheria was called the emperor's wife, the truth of the matter was that she was no more wife to him, but rather a sister, reigning together with him and guiding well the reins of government for the great good of the entire Church of God and for the benefit of the whole empire. Likewise, Marcian, although called Pulcheria's husband, was in fact not a husband, but a brother to her, reigning with her who was the daughter of an emperor and the heir to the throne of her father. At that time, virginal purity was seen to reign on the throne of the Greek Empire, for an emperor who was chaste in soul and body ruled together with an empress who preserved herself unsullied. O virginal marriage, scarce ever seen or heard of, let the world full of unclean lusts marvel. Let those who are enslaved to the passions and bodily pleasures be shamed, hearing of the pious marriage of this imperial couple, like the angels in purity. Through St. Pulcheria's exertions, 2 councils of the Holy Fathers were convened, one at Chalcedon against the impious Dioscorus and Eutychus the Archimandrite, and the other at Ephesus. She struggled greatly for piety, as is testified by learned men in their writings, who ascribed to her the defense of the Orthodox faith at both councils of Ephesus and Chalcedon. Such was her zeal for piety and great wisdom that the Holy Spirit dwelt in her soul and pure heart as though in a holy temple, filling her with abundant gifts. And when she had lived for 54 years and distributed all that she owned to churches, monasteries, and the poor, she reposed in the Lord, whom she had served with all fervor. Through her prayers, O Lord, deprive us not of thy heavenly kingdom. Amen.